All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you guys so much for coming here to our event. This is Healing Trauma with Plant Medicines and Mushrooms. And this is presented and brought to you guys by the Education Committee of Decriminalized Nature, Arizona. And my name is Stuart Preston. I'm going to be the moderator. And we've got three amazing guests here today. Very honored to have these three experts here to talk to you guys about the subject. But real quick, Decriminalized Nature Arizona it's a coalition of people here in our state that are focused on the value of entheogenic plants and fungi. And we really believe that nobody should be criminalized, labeled a criminal for choosing to use these substances. And we seek to inform the community about these natural plants and fungi and support cities who are proposing resolutions to decriminalize these things. So this is our very first event. There may be some bugs, there may be some issues, but we're here to just inform, let you guys know what's going on. And there will be more as we're going. August 11th is our next one, and I'll tell you more about that as we get to the end. So before I jump in and introduce these amazing guests, I just have a little bit of housekeeping. Number one, I think that you guys have found it, but on the right of your screen is the chat. And unlike a live event where we tell you to turn off your phones and shut up, right? This one, we want you to chat and have fun with each other. And if you have a question, you can enter it in to ask a question down there at the bottom. If you go there and you see if somebody's already asked a question you want to ask, just upvote it and then read the other questions. If you see something in there that you want asked, upvote it. And my job is to pick the questions and get them out to these three people and get you guys some answers. So share information, chat with each other, give us some emojis, whatever you want to do there. Ask your questions. It's interactive because here in the socially distanced world, we don't need to be boring. We can have fun, while we do all this. So with that, I think it's time to get started today. They were getting some feedback there from somebody, but so again, the topic today is healing trauma with plant medicines and mushrooms. And we're lucky to have these three guests here today. And so I'm going to start off. I'm going to introduce each one of them and then give them a chance to kind of give their own introduction and maybe share some information on their area of expertise or really whatever's on their mind. So let's start off here. And I'm going to first introduce Belinda. We have Belinda is of Dene and Ashiwi descent. Her maternal clan is One Walks Around. She was born for the Zuni Pueblo people and raised on the Navajo reservation. She is the wisdom carrier, healer, and founder of Kalogi, focused on cultural and traditional healing and inner healing. She holds degrees in health sciences, technology, and public health. And she's also participated in the MDMA therapy training for people of color hosted by MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. Hey, Adam, maybe you can throw the link to that on there because we're going to be mentioning that a lot. Adam's my reference guy. She's an international speaker on various topics impacting Native American communities, also currently serving as a member of the board of directors for the Church of the Eagle and the Condor. So Belinda, did I get all that right?
I believe you did. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. So thanks for joining us. And what would you like to say or add, here to get us started?
Sure. Thank you, Stuart. Before I get started this evening, what I wanted to do is I wanted to acknowledge our relatives that live here in the area in which I reside. I live in Tempe, and I wanted to pay my respects to the Hohokam and the Oldham people that live in the southern part of Arizona. I want to express my gratitude for allowing me to be the steward of this original territories of their homelands. And I do this to build relationships with those around us, which is going to be really key to some of the points that I want to make today. But it's also so fundamental to the changes that we are all going through right now in this time of change, and as we are all sitting in place at home. One of the things that I thought was very important for me to talk a little bit about tonight was talking a little bit about some of the foundational elements coming from the perspective of Native American about healing. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that because it kind of sets the foundation of how others can view traditional and Native American teachings as part of the psychedelic movement. First, I want to talk a little bit about the understanding in a Diné culture way. Um, the Diné people are matrilinear, and so all of our teachings and our lineage get inherited through our mother's side. And so that's basically what I'm going to be doing today. I wanted to talk a little bit about, as human beings, we typically think of ourselves just as a body, and there's so much more beyond that. There are really three key elements as human beings that we really need to understand in order to heal. And these three elements for the healing process include the mind, the body, and the spirit. And they come in a certain order from the way that we are taught as Diné people. The beginnings of our life actually begin with our spirit form, which is also referred to, I guess, in Western thought is also referred to as the soul. And the spirit projects itself into a mind that we use, and typically in a Western thought, that's the very first place we start from. And the mind then projects itself into a body which we physically reside in, and it's the vessel in which our spirit and our mind reside. The spirit needs the mind in which it creates thought, perceptions, and sensations. And that is really critical, especially when you're going through the healing process and especially with trauma. But the mind also needs the body to be a part of that experience as human beings as we go through our lifetime. And so I just want to take a little example. In the Native American culture, there's a lot of intergenerational trauma based on historical issues that have happened. And so a lot of our people, including myself, what ends up happening is we physically have those traumas within our body. And we typically, that's the first place that we go to when we go to see a medical doctor, is that becomes the focus. But when you use psychedelic medicine, you're able to actually get to the core of that, which is really the way that we perceive things in our mind, but also going back to the original source, which is our spirit. And so the spirit is also part of what we all know as the collective consciousness, or the source, or the Christ consciousness. And the spirit is something that will continue when we leave this physical body. It will reincarnate into the next lifetime. And that's part of our process that we go through. In our Diné teachings, they talk about the cycles of life. So we are born into this physical place. We go through our adolescence, and then we go through adulthood. We go through our elderhood, and then we return back to the source again, back in the spirit, and that is the cycle of life. And many of you can equate this from a religious perspective. So if you think about in some of the teachings, for instance, in Catholicism, they talk about the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And so the Father represents the spirit aspect, the Son is the body, and the Holy Spirit is the mind. And the other parts that I wanted to talk about and why this is so relevant is that in Western thought, we have a tendency to break things up into silos. So we have medicine, we have biology, we have mathematics. And in the teachings of the Diné, a lot of the Native American people of Turtle Island, we don't see those as separate things. They're all one and the same thing. And that becomes a part of the healing process when we're going through any type of healings through rituals or ceremonies, etc. And so for those that have had psychedelic experiences, when you can reflect back on those experiences, a lot of times when you can go to that place of that experience, a lot of times that trauma is residing inside of your body. And for my personal experience, for instance, with ayahuasca, I was going through some illnesses, physical illnesses, and being able to take the sacred plant medicine, it allowed me to go in deeper to locate it and then to really from a spiritual and a mental standpoint to alter that perception and really understand it. And so coming full circle to all of that, then it becomes a big part of that healing process and that integration piece. And so that I hope that people find this useful in their own experiences, because the interconnectedness of these three aspects that I speak of are so critical to our healing. And several years ago, I was my first opportunity to speak at one of the psychedelic conferences. And one of the things that I made very clear in a room full of medical folks was that, why is it that spirit is always last? Spirit needs to be first, because that is where we start from as existence of human beings. And much of our suffering as human beings is seeing ourselves beyond just being a physical body. And, as we all know, for those of us that have been in this field and have gone through our own healing, it's really that struggle and with the ego really wanting to take control of all of those aspects of our lives and forgetting about the mental piece and the spiritual piece. And we never really get into our heart space, which is where a lot of the healing begins. And so, I'm reminded of an elder, Grandma Aggie, who used to tell us that the longest journey as human beings that we will ever make is from our mind to our heart. And it's only 18 inches away. And so I'm always reminded of that. And now I understand what she meant. In the Diné culture, there's a term called Hojong. Hojong means to be in balance and harmony with everything around us. So that means, when we're going out in the daytime, really being mindful of the things that we say, the things that we do, our actions, but also really being mindful about those things that don't have a voice. So plants, the trees, etc. And when we walk in Hojong, we walk in balance with everything around us. And when we don't walk in balance, then there's that imbalance or dis-ease, that we create of our own doing. And so the healing process really needs to look at all of these different aspects. So when many are able to witness traditional ceremonies or healings through our rituals, our songs, and our prayers, they're really focusing on all of these aspects, not just the physical aspect. And so I think that's really key to the psychedelics that really need the psychedelic movement and really incorporating that into therapies, etc. The other thing that I wanted to speak a little bit about is just reverence for the plants. As I mentioned earlier, I talked a little bit about the interconnectedness of everything that is around us. And there is also that interconnectedness. There's a word in the Adrian, the people of the Andes. They have a word that is called Ayni, Ayni. And Ayni means sacred reciprocity. So in its true sense of the word, it's today for me, tomorrow for you. And that's in everything that we, that surrounds us or that we interact with. And it's really the principle of energetic exchange, of give and take. And so one of the things as we move through this phase and this evolution of psychedelics, because it's really moving quickly, is that we need to keep that in mind, because that also includes the sacred plant medicines and the manner in which that we care for them and we honor them. In the Lakota language, many of you are familiar with the term Medakuyase, which means we are all related. And this really speaks to this point, but it also means to be willing to watch for the silent nations and to speak for the silent nations, which are the animals, the trees, the clouds, the plants, and really being good stewards of those medicines. And the same thing goes for psychedelics. And one of the things that I find, and that is really important to me as a Native American person, is really honoring these plants in that way from the time that they're actually harvested, if they are harvested from a plant, or their actual creation, that there needs to be care and thought put into that, the way that it's made all the way through the process. Because in our teachings, what they say is that if you don't honor that process throughout that medicine's life cycle, there's a consequence that you have to pay as an individual and as a recipient of that medicine. So that is a really important teaching that I wanted to share. And then the last couple of points that I really wanted to talk about, Stuart, were really just some points about Native American in general and as it relates to psychedelics. The very first point I wanted to talk about is the need for inclusion in policy making. I spent the last 3 or 4 months having multiple conversations with, the decriminalized nature in the Bay Area about the lack of inclusion of Native American voice, the original people of Turtle Island. And we are the caretakers, and we've always been the caretakers and had that responsibility, that sacred responsibility that I talked about. And we will continue to be here as those stewards in our generations that are yet to come. And so it's really important for us to have that voice and to sit at the table and help to create whatever needs to be created. I think sometimes organizations come to the table with already preconceived ideas of what they want as the outcome, rather than really meeting everybody where they're at and then creating from there. So that is one really key point that I wanted to stress. The other point that I wanted to mention was the need for access to these sacred plant medicines for Native American communities. In our American history, there were really 2 fundamental tenets that were part of treaties and the relationships between Native Americans and government. And those 2 tenets were education, and the other one was healthcare. And right now, we're really starting to see the government in its true colors when it comes to this COVID virus across the country, where the Native American people were promised, monies, and 2.5 months later, we're just not receiving those monies, and we're in the midst of, crisis right now. And so that has always how it's been as Native Americans, and so. That is one of the things that I hope as this movement continues to move forward, that there will also be available access to Native American individuals and communities as we move forward. So those are pretty much some of the points that I wanted to bring up, Stuart. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Belinda. Good points for us all to remember, here in the organization. All right. So next, I'm very honored to introduce Kate Hawke. Kate is the director of the Trauma Transformation Network and Native American Trauma Project, and is also the founder of the International Energy Psychology Conferences. She lives and works at the Gateway Ranch northeast of Flagstaff, a private venue for personal healing, group retreats, and community celebrations. And her friendship, this is part of her presentations I always have a good laugh at. Her friendship with Rick Doblin, the founder of MAPS, goes back to meeting as 20-year-olds at New College in Florida. And she's been a member of MAPS, ever since the 1980s. Now, she also recognizes the risks of these mind-altering substances, especially in this time of prohibition. And she worked for 5 years with MAPS Harm Reduction Services at Burning Man. She believes that a balanced approach to education along with decriminalization will increase safety, along with maximizing benefits for individuals and for our community. In her community up in Flagstaff, she co-founded the Star School, an off-grid charter school with a Navajo student population. Currently, she's laying the groundwork to build a trauma healing and training center nearby, which is planned as one of the initial sites to offer prescription MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD, hopefully as soon as 2022. So, Kate, welcome, and thank you for joining the panel here. And hope I got all that right. Please, take that and run and let us know what you can share with us.
All right. Well, we have an echo. I'm just going to keep talking, but I hear an echo. If you could do anything about that. So.
All right. Yeah, I'm not hearing an echo, so hopefully it's just you. But go ahead and drive on and see if it doesn't drive you too crazy. Waiting for Kate to reconnect.
No.
All right.
Dave, I think I
Yeah, you sound better. Oh, no, you don't. Hey, does that echo sound familiar to anybody?
Dave,
all right.
What's the thing that you did
Right,
that you had to fix?
All right, I think you're back.
I'm back?
Yes.
All right. I'm just going to talk with an echo unless somebody else says it's a problem. Sorry about that, everyone. What I really wanted to say was I'm so glad that we're here together. There was a lot happening in Arizona recently, starting with the Arizona Psychedelics Conference in February 2019, which seemed like a lifetime ago. And then the Arizona Plant Medicine Conference happened in Tucson in December. You know, we saw a lot of you there. So ever since then, there were a lot of personal connections. And in Tucson, at the very end of February, this echoes my nuts here. So at the end of February, there were about 80 of us who got together in Tucson at the psychedelic assisted therapy and integration 2-day workshop. So at that point, it seemed like everything was coming together in the Southwest. Oh no, barely.
It sounds like it might be getting a little better.
So, I mean, I can just talk through, but it's very distracting to hear the echo. It's better now?
Well, it gets better and it gets worse. It almost sounds like it's an internet connection problem. You get any kind of... All right, it's getting. They're saying it's getting better. Let's just keep going and see, and hopefully it won't drive you too crazy. Sorry about that, Kate.
All right, Dave, you can. The red mic is red, yes. Okay, I still hear the echo, but maybe you don't.
Can't hear you.
Okay. It was really fine, and I clicked on these little something I should have clicked on. Anyway, I'll keep talking. I'll make it brief. I just wanted to say it seemed like things were really getting gear in Arizona, and I, as of the end of February, plan to do an event in Tempe for now. Of course, that was canceled. I don't have 2 windows open, and it worked fine when we were testing.
Yeah, it was working. It was working great. Something just has come off the rails here.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what. Why don't we switch up?
Switch up the Dave and let's see what we do.
Let's put Dave on, and then maybe the computer gods will come and fix our problem just automatically.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Yeah. Sorry, Kate. All right, Dave. So I'm going to bring you up here. Let me introduce Dr. David Robertson. I had a real pleasure to see him talk down at the Plant Medicine Conference in Tucson. I think anybody who got to see him, it was a packed room. Everybody wanted to see him speak. Really, really enjoyed that. So we're really happy to have him here with us today. He is a doctor, get this, at the Arizona Department of Corrections. Yes. And he graduated from medical school at the very young, ripe age of 50. And he found his calling in correctional medicine. And he's worked for the Department of Corrections now for the last 10 years while observing inmate population over that time. So 9 years, 10 years. But while observing the inmate population over that time, he realized that many of these, quote, criminals aren't really criminals at all, and that their crimes often involve the manifestations of PTSD and or childhood trauma. And he speaks on the pharmacology of psilocybin and its impending therapeutic uses. So Dave, welcome. Take the stage and let us know what's on your mind with psilocybin.
All right. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I am really sorry that I'm not able to hear Kate.
Yeah, well, it's all of us. It's all of us. So you got the floor now. Let's see what you got.
Yeah, we'll see what you got. Okay, let's see what I got. Hey.
All right.
Well, I'm Dr. Robertson. I live in Tucson. I work for the Department of Correction. It's been 11 years. And in my time out of medical school and residency in the prison system, I've recognized that a lot of the problems in our correctional system are due to trauma, childhood abuse, bad family environments, things like that. And they'll grow up and manifest, into criminal behavior. And that we need to treat that problem before we're going to affect any type of change in our recidivism. Now, recidivism is when someone gets released from prison and they come back, and I'm working with one specific population, the transgender population, and our recidivism rate is just insanely high. I'm talking they get out and they're back in a week. And when you get down and start talking deep stuff, it all relates to childhood trauma and PTSD. See a lot of violence that's manifested from toxic masculinity and the drug addiction and the, alcoholism. You can get anything you want in a prison, let me tell you. But anyhow, I'm very interested in the way the brain works and how this new renaissance psychedelic therapy has come about. The pharmacology of it is pretty simple. The psilocybin mushroom has been used in ceremony for thousands of years, and what they're finding now in scientific tools is that the profound effects in the brain architecture and neural pathways that psychedelics have can be used to affect positive change. One of the breakthrough treatments that psychedelics have been used for has been on near death. When people are actively dying, or they're going to die when they're terminal, they give them some mushrooms and see what happens. And to the person that described as a positive effect. I was looking today at where the research is going, and on the MAPS website and in the Johns Hopkins research, they're doing MRI studies, functional MRI studies. They're doing PET scans and CTs and all this scientific documentation as to the effects of psychedelics on the brain. And, it's all doing what we thought it would do, It's just piling on the evidence for decriminalization. For me, what I find to be most efficacious in my studies and in personal use is microdosing. I was reading an article today on microdosing, on how there's in science, everything is active challenged, and there's some good points made, but I know what I've been experiencing microdosing in the last 6 months, and I can tell you there's positive change in my life. Gosh, I really don't know what to say when I'm in the presence of such amazing people, other than, there's science going on. It's good science. It's peer-reviewed science. It's going to keep coming. And hopefully in time, we'll be able to get some decriminalization on that. My goal in my practice is to become a counselor and take the MAPS training with MDMA, and to see if I can't be of any assistance that way. But the number one thing we have to do is treat trauma, and it's not always done with a cast and a Band-Aid, if you know what I mean. So that's about all I got, you guys. If there's any questions or anything on the research, I'll be glad to answer them. It's I don't have my papers in front of me right now about my talk, but the default mode network, all those things that they're studying right now, that's all being reinforced with science. Perceptual changes of their realities that's all being changed. It's being used now with talk therapy. A gram of mushrooms will make someone talk. Let me tell you, think again. You can really get down to some stuff doing that. I'm not a psychiatrist, but I can. It doesn't take me too long to see that we have some gold here, and it needs to continue. That's about it.
Awesome, Dave. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, Kate, let's see what we got now.
Let's see if this works. Sounds pretty echoey again.
It's sounding good to me, so maybe it's just annoying you, but that happened last time and it got worse. So let's just see what happens.
All right. I want to make sure that we address the this is terrible. I'm just hearing this terrible echo. So if I have no headphones in, I can't hear myself at all, but you can hear me. So
you want to pull the headphones?
I put my echo away, and then I will just talk. So what I was trying to say earlier was how thrilling it was to see the momentum that was picking up in Arizona with all of the events and the online groups and the planned groups to get together. And then everything came to a halt. I remember when we were together in Tucson, it was February 27th and 28th. And there was no question at all about canceling the event. It just was not even on the radar. And then, of course, 2 weeks later, everything was canceled. So I'm very grateful for this event, bringing everybody together. I'm glad there are more planned. And I would love to participate in anything that you in the community have going on. Please don't hesitate to invite me to participate however I can, which for a while will probably be virtually, which is great. This is convenient. And, it's not the same as getting together face to face, but it really works. And we can keep informed and we can, keep making the connections. I want to say my website, katehawke.com. I will keep putting resources up there. So PowerPoint presentations from the Arizona Medicine Conference are up there. Various research documents. There's a list of resources that could keep you busy studying the rest of the year, all the things online. And so I will just keep putting things on katehawke.com under resources. When there are more events, we'll post them there. If you're doing something, I would be really happy to share that with anybody that I'm connected with. There's a wave. There's a wave happening here. This event, the pandemic is in a way interrupting things, but in a way it's bringing to people's attention the need more than ever, the need for healing trauma. And we have a whole new kind of trauma. If anything, this is bringing us more aware of how we are all connected and we all need to heal together. So psychedelics, what amazing tools. There's so much that could be said. I want to make sure that we address questions from the group. So I'm not going to take off. It could take off in any direction at this point and talk for another hour, but I won't do that. I will say, please consider me a resource. If you have any questions, I'm going to talk to my buddy Rick this weekend. Belinda and I had a great talk yesterday. We are working with whoever is interested and involved with Native American communities. It's time to think this through about, what's the bigger picture, the long term, even just a few years, what can be done to have psychedelic healing available for Native communities. And of course, what we do in Native communities will benefit everybody. We're really looking at these medicines as, I don't want to say a tool because they're actually beings, but as part of the resources that we have for healing. And how can we use them most effectively? How can we avoid the problems that, there are things that happen that, I'll just say for myself, I did a ketamine-assisted therapy training, a legal therapist training after the Tucson event. And I felt like there was a part of myself that didn't come back, that it saw an opportunity to take off. And I just came back recently, about 4 months later. So there are cautions. It's important to have, to be conscientious about how we use these medicines. I'll just leave it at that. And then somebody mentioned addiction. That's, if you look at the statistics for adverse childhood experiences, childhood traumas, the correlation between childhood trauma and addiction is enormous. There are a few people who are addicted to intravenous drugs, for instance, who didn't have a good deal of childhood trauma. The childhood trauma alcohol statistics, that correlation is enormous. Over 1,000% more alcoholism among people with a fairly high level of trauma as compared to people with a low level of trauma. And then there are studies about specifically mushrooms or psilocybin in the studies, because they have to use the chemical, not the mushroom. But psilocybin being used, most well known is for cigarette smoking cessation. So there are other things that are being studied for that too. So website to Gateway Ranch. There's a Facebook page that's Gateway Ranch. I don't have too much up that's recent because actually I'm getting ready to sell the Gateway Ranch. So I'm planning to let go of the Gateway Ranch and put everything into the center, Hojon being the word that Belinda used, being harmony. Sometimes people say walking beauty, but it's really what is good? What is the bigger, in all ways, what is beautiful, what is good, what is the harmonious way of living? So Hojon is harmonious life, and that's the center that is in the works, step by step, next to the Star School. So I'm really getting ready to let go of the Gateway Ranch. We're going to have some work parties to get the place in shape this summer. If people want to come out, this will be the last chance. But other than that, on my website, khawke.com, there's some things about healing retreats. I am doing trauma healing retreats. I've been a trauma therapist for 30 years. And so I think it's very exciting territory of what's coming up after we establish the effectiveness of psilocybin and MDMA by themselves in just a general supportive therapeutic context. Then we'll have a chance, once they're legal pharmaceuticals by prescription, we'll have a chance to explore more about how do we make the most of using the most effective trauma therapy approaches and psychedelics in a whole healing protocol. So that's coming up, and we're just getting ready.
Nice. Thank you, Kate. All right. Hey, Kate, I wonder if you yank those headphones out of the computer and just use the computer. Would that be possible? We'll just see if that gets any better. Okay. So let's start with some Q&A. And the first one I've got here is actually for you, Belinda. So I hope you're rested and ready to go for some questions here. This one is, so I think it's for you. We'll throw it your way. What are some ways in which spirituality can be woven into treatment of trauma? Will spirituality be an important aspect for treatment, such as psychedelic psychotherapy?
To answer the easier question for the second part of that question is, it really depends on the protocols that are established. I will share with you, my own personal experience with spirituality. I did a blend of my traditional Diné teachings as part of a healing process I went through with MDMA. There were some prayers that were done ahead of time. There was prayers over the plant medicine before I took it. And then throughout the process, there were songs and chants and prayers that were song as part of that process. And I think that to me, what I believe is that when Native Americans come to therapists' office, that needs to be an option that is provided. And the reason why I say that is because I look at a lot of the mental health care and the system and models that are being created out there, and they're not very culturally based and appropriate for the Native American population. So what you end up having is you end up having a recidivism of, conditions reoccurring all over again. And so I think the more that you can blend that in and meet the person where they're at, I made that point as part of my presentation early on, that's really key to helping, Native American people really have a successful healing.
Okay, thank you. Kate, you talked about, we'll see if you got your audio working here. I got a question. You talk about the dangers or the risks involved. And in your intro, we talked about the years you spent, harm reduction at Burning Man. How can people listen? I mean, what is the key to reducing harm when using plant medicines?
Well, the principles. Oh man, let me plug in what I had.
Yeah, I took a chance.
That's all right. Okay. See, now I can hear you, but I can not hear the echo.
Okay. We can hear you a little bit. Yeah, let's keep going.
Okay. So the principles have been outlined for a long time. Everybody knows about set and setting, and then substance, which includes what is the substance actually, and the dosage. So many of the problems of dangers of illegal drugs are because they're illegal, right? Because who knows what's actually in a pill or in white powder. Mushrooms, at least, are probably mushrooms, but there's just so much misinformation and incomplete information along with substances that are unknown. So these things that make it safe partly would be a lot safer if it was legal. So set and setting, substance, sitter, somebody there who's who's actually being responsible for all the safety considerations really makes a huge difference, allowing someone to just pay attention to their own experience and feel safe, and then also not get stuck in case anything comes up that's overwhelming. And then, then the situation, which includes integration afterwards. What about what life is the person coming back into? What about their relationships? Do they have supportive relationships with their friends and family? Do they have somebody who with some experience who can be supportive? So all of those are safety factors. If those are things that are in place, that people may have rough experiences or intense experiences, but that's all on the way to healing. What happens, unfortunately, is a lot of random things. I know I was a teenager. Somebody gave me something and said, "Take this," and okay, swallow it down and then see what happens, and go to high school on acid. So decriminalization, I think, as a grandmother, I feel like I can make a very sincere, heartfelt plea for decriminalization in terms of safety, and not only for young people. I kind of pick on young people, but given my recent experience, even in a very legitimate, legal, therapeutic, well thought out setting, I just pulled myself back out of a very intense ketamine experience. The group was, they hadn't taken as much and they were ready to chat and go on. And I didn't have the space to really complete my experience. So that was a good lesson for me, even as a therapist, even after all these years of experience, that things, we are dealing with a lot of powerful factors. And that's what the power for healing is there, but also the power for, messing with things that we don't really understand. So I'm all for moving ahead. I'm absolutely for decriminalizing and making these things legal and more available. And at the same time, absolutely, let's have people who are trained, who are well trained. Let's have a balance between moving ahead at a good rate and just diving in with our enthusiasm and not necessarily knowing everything to look at.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Hey, Doc, we got a question about microdosing, and I imagine that a lot of people have questions about microdosing. So maybe you could talk a little bit about the frequency, dosage, protocol, any thoughts you have out there on microdosing.
Okay, the thing about microdosing, it's microdosing. You're not to, you don't be taking, if you can feel it, you're taking too much. Now, a lot of different strains. I saw a comment in the thread about how much to take and what type to take. That's all individual. You can try cubensis and standard starter is like 100 milligrams a day. If you feel it, then go down to 50. The thing is, if you're feeling it, that queasy little feeling you get when you're starting to come on, that's too much. You shouldn't be feeling it. And then whether or not it has antidepressant properties or, healing properties that's all up for debate right now. There's very little research being done on it. The people I've talked to that have microdosed for a while say it has health benefit for them. Other people have said me, so all I know is my experience, and I feel that I have had a certain amount of benefit having done microdosing and antidepressants in my past, trying to look for healing. I really loved the discussion that Belinda put forth on the body, mind, and spirit. Once we put our spirit in front, it's like a 3-team horse. If you have 3 horses and you put them in pulling a wagon, the lead horse automatically goes in the middle. If the lead horse is placed on the side, the team won't work. But once you put the spirit first, the mind and the body will follow. This is common knowledge amongst wise people. I had to learn that the hard way too. But back to microdosing, I feel that there is efficacy and that it needs more research, and go slow and go low. Okay? And again, as Kate said, set and setting for any type of work that you're going to do is very, very important. And the integration afterwards is just as important as the journey you take. And without that, you're cheating yourself. So that said, that's all I got. Thanks.
What about, in addition to dosage, what about frequency when you're talking about microdosing?
Daily, in the morning.
Every single day?
Every single day. That's the regime I've been following.
Yeah.
And, I've had good benefits.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Dave. All right. This one is a general question. I don't know who wants to jump in and answer it, but are there different scenarios where you guys might suggest one plant medicine over another, especially, for specific treatments and traumas? Any experience with that, or recommendations or thoughts on choosing the right plant medicine for whatever you're treating? Kate?
Never know. I'm sorry.
No?
This echo is just driving me crazy. I'm going to stick to chat.
All right. I'll tell you what, while we do that, maybe you can reload the browser and see if you pop back in and it resets itself. So we'll see if Belinda or Dave, do you have a comment on how to choose the right plant medicine?
I think it really depends on what the individual's intentions are. Certainly, if you're trying to work on a specific issue, you may or may not want to use ayahuasca because it's something where you really don't have control over where you're going to go or how much you're going to take or how the medicine is prepared. But if you're going to work on something that's more tangible or you have a little bit more control over, something like MDMA is something that would be advisable. And the other thought that I have is that, from my understanding and some of the uses of psilocybin and the mushrooms, the sacred mushroom, is in the indigenous teachings, they say that the mushrooms are the child. If you have inner child types of issues that you want to work with, that is the medicine that you can use. And so I would, again, these are just my own personal opinions. I would strongly recommend that somebody get with somebody that's experienced in that. And again, really think about what it is that you're trying to achieve and what your intentions are. And that will help you decide what you're ready for. Thank you.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Dave, did you have something you wanted to add in there?
When you're looking at choosing a plant medicine, be very careful. If you're going to be going there, then you should be in this proper setting. You should have a guide. This is something you should not do alone, and the guide should be of clear mind. So someone has to hold space. That's really important. And I see Kate back, and I wonder if she got it to work. And
yeah,
she's
Kate.
muted on her.
Are you back, Kate? You're muted. So how are you doing? You echoing in your brain?
I'm cautious. I'm cautiously optimistic, but it's a shorter echo now. Let me just say a little bit about going back to my dosing. People of protocol, I know there's a lot of interest. James Fadiman's protocol was to take LSD every 3 days. So 1 day on, 2 days off. And then there's the Stamets, Paul Stamets protocol with mushrooms. And his was to get either 4 or 5 days in a row, and then the other 2 or 3 days off. So it's a weekly cycle. So just to throw that in there. I could say that without thinking too deeply. As far as what to use, ever since Michael Pollan's book came out, I've gotten a lot of calls from people, and they've seen James Hopkins research, and they want to have one of those make my ego disappear and have one of the most meaningful experiences of my life. And they've also probably heard Terence McKenna's recommendation for 5 grams in a silent dark room. I don't sit with people for those kind of experiences. I don't tell people what to do, but I also have my own experience with high-dose mushrooms or truffles in the Netherlands. And it was one of the most meaningful experiences of my life. I would say changed my view of reality since then. But it came after about 10 or 12 hours over 2 days of misery. Of just mind chatter, nausea, nothing dangerous, but just as miserable as I can imagine. And having lost, I can be miserable too. It's just relentless misery. So all of that leading up to those meaningful experiences can be more than people expect. What I found in the research was MDMA is what has been researched the most for PTSD. And there are reasons why MDMA works very well for trauma. I mean, it's not a pure medicine, but I know it's of interest to the group. MDMA, I really apologize. It's really hard to think and talk with this echo. But I'll just say there are reasons why MDMA is a pretty ideal trauma medicine, because it calms down the parts of the brain, the amygdala, that's the fight or flight centers, and it keeps the frontal cortex online, the thinking process online. People don't find it terribly trippy, and they can look at the practical realities of their life, but they can look at the things that have been so difficult and painful, really unable to think about it clearly. And with MDMA medicine, that they, people can stay with their experience, and the principles that apply to good trauma therapy work well in the MDMA context. So people have an extended time, they have support without interference, and MDMA is like a very ideal medicine for trauma. Of course, people have found benefits from other things. I'm thinking of the Heroic Hearts Project, which is veterans with ayahuasca. And that's veterans doing it in a context with other veterans in an ayahuasca ceremony. So that's, in that context can be very healing. And then Native American church ceremonies, in the ceremony, it's not called therapy, but people do find therapeutic results. People sometimes, I know people who stop drinking alcohol because they found help in Native American church with peyote ceremonies. So a lot of it is individual, but I think we're starting to learn also some things about brain functioning that give us some clues about what might be good for, which purposes.
Okay, thank you, Kate. All right. There was a question that I'm gonna leave it in chat, but for any of the people on the Decrim Arizona group, you might want to look over there. And he was asking, actually it looks like he took it off the questions, but the question is basically, is this going to be done city by city like we've seen in Oakland and Denver, or is it going to be a statewide, or is it going to be short-term city, long-term state? So I'll let that jump onto the chat, only because we're not talking specifically with committee folks right here until we can recruit them. But they're plenty busy enough doing what they're doing. So here's an interesting question. There was one about race. Let me find that one. I think I lost it. All right, we'll just start at the top. Okay, so this question is, how can we ensure new methods of healing here it is, do not replicate racial disparities that we see in other medical and therapy fields? How can we ensure communities of color have access to these medicines as well? Anybody want to jump on that one? Maybe the question needs some clarification. We just want to make sure that people of all races have the same level of access. I think, Belinda, you did mention something like this when you were talking, so maybe you want to expand on that or try to address it.
Yeah, I think that's a very difficult question because there's a lot of different social nuances that occur in different areas. And I think that's something, I think people of color have always been second and third in line for everything. And to really understand what their issues are, they really need to outreach. And I think that's one of the points that I made in the MDMA therapy training that I attended, was that as I sat with a room full of therapists of different nationalities and from all over the United States, one of the things that I thought was kind of interesting was that each and every one of them were expecting people of color to show up in their therapy offices. which to me, when you talk about people of color, the resources are already limited. And I raise the question, how are you making your services available and meeting them in their own communities? To me, there are those types of issues that I think are really organizations really need to understand when they're talking about accessibility. And then again, there's a lot of social nuances, political nuances that go around that. So I think that's, if you're talking about a specific area, I think that would help to, I can have a little bit more specific answer around that. So thank you.
Okay. Yeah, good. Thank you. Dave, a question for you when it comes to the correctional world. What change do you see as most promising from a correctional perspective? Is psilocybin therapy a possibility in the correctional system in the near future?
The best research right now is for MDMA. For these traumas. I'm not sure where it's going to go. I know that the whole planet and the whole civilization is undergoing some really major changes. I hope we all make it. But as far as using psychedelics in a correctional setting, the system is so ossified. It's so reluctant to change. It took me 3 years to get the Department of Corrections to recognize that we had transgender inmates. It took me 4 more years to get them hormones. It took me more years to get them makeup, just basic dignity. I'm sure some of these guys are knuckle draggers and we'll never see them change at all. Maybe they're the ones we need to get the therapy to first. But it is very rigid, very inflexible, and the culture is so deep that I don't know if we're going to see that type of therapy come unless there's some really good research, especially in Arizona. Especially in Arizona. So I don't have much hope in my lifetime to see it happening, but who knows with where everything's going right now. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So what do you guys consider, any one of you consider or label to be trauma? The subject here is healing trauma with plant medicines. What is trauma? How do you label it? How do you understand it? And then how do you work with somebody, with plant medicines when you recommend it or discuss it? But first start with what is trauma?
And I'll answer that question just from a general context. To me, trauma is really related to any emotional distress that is caused by any type of experience. It could be a car accident, it could be sexual abuse, it could be, a whole host of things. And it's really, to me, really individualized in terms of how that person reacts to that particular situation. So to me, that's really what trauma is, in my understanding.
Okay. Kate, I don't know if we got anything working. No, I don't know, but I know that when I watched your presentation, you mentioned, I think it was ACE. I can sometimes remember the acronym, but I can't remember what it stood for. Like maybe ACE, something to do with childhood experiences and how it builds up and creates trauma later in life.
Yeah. Right. Adverse childhood experiences, which was a study back in the 90s, but it's gotten a lot of attention in recent years. Like people see that childhood trauma is behind so many of the problems and health problems and social problems that we have now. I would say trauma could be anything that overwhelms a person's ability to stay present and is willing and able to have an experience. So anything else might be intense, but if people go through the experience, and process it at that time, it doesn't come back and is something that can be triggered for the rest of their life. Where trauma, for whatever combination of reasons, at the time, it was confusing just because we were kids. And, how do you make sense out of things adults do that don't make sense? But for whatever reason, these things are put on hold in our system. And so the things that we consider symptoms may be very uncomfortable, but they're also clues, they're opportunities to bring those things that couldn't be dealt with at the time in that condition. But now we have a safe space, we have the conditions that may or may not involve medicine, psychedelic medicines, or therapists. But for whatever combination of factors, a person has a safe space and the ability to stay with an experience, reframe it, and then there's the processing involved too, of course. Mm-hmm. So MDMA, psilocybin, in setting, the person has a whole day and attentive witnesses who are supportive, who don't interfere and don't pretend to be the expert on somebody else's experience. Those are the kind of conditions that allow the healing to happen. So we talked about the inner intelligence. That's the MAPS training, and I think that's a great concept. It helps the therapist stay out of the way, and also just trust the process. But it helps people trust ourselves that we do all have that inner healing intelligence. And if we have conditions which might involve psychedelic medicines, that is healing does happen.
Okay. That actually didn't sound too horrible, so thank you. Yeah, Dave, what do you got?
Sounds horrible here.
Sorry.
I'm just looking at, I did a quick little Google, and there's acute trauma from a single incident, chronic trauma that's repeated and prolonged, such as domestic abuse or violence. And then there's complex. This is what I'm reading off of the state of Montana or Missouri.gov. And that kind of gives us some nice classes, I think, to work with.
Yeah, that's good. So the answer is, let me Google that for you.
I think one of the other points that I also wanted to make is there's also what is referred to as unresolved trauma, especially for Native American people. When Native Americans continue to go through these traumatic historical events and they never have that time to grieve those responses to that particular trauma, they become very compounded. And what ends up happening is those traumas then get passed on to the next generation. And a great example of that is boarding schools. My mom was raised and she went to a boarding school. And as a result of that, she never taught us to learn our language because it was a mechanism for protecting us because she, was disciplined if she spoke her language. And so there's a lot of those types of experiences that are also considered trauma as well that I wanted to bring up.
Okay, thank you. I think we got a follow-up question on that. When we're talking about childhood trauma, I think we talk about it mostly like it's showing up in adulthood and then treating it with these remedies. What age is it appropriate to use these therapies? Is there ever a chance to use some of these therapies with younger people, or is it always something it should be waited till they're adults and their brains are formed?
The sooner the better.
The sooner the better.
I mean, there are things that are appropriate to do at different stages, and I wouldn't jump in and go into therapy mode immediately, but providing safety, helping a person just be able to be more present with their experience, not add more trauma, to support them and relieve them rather than add more of the kind of things that are you could call safe harbor trauma, things that happen when people try to get help. But there are things that can just help a person be present with their experience, go through it, And then if they want to have more healing experiences afterwards, that can happen anytime in life.
Okay, thank you. And unless somebody's got more questions, you can always post your questions. I've got the last question here. Almost sounds like a question for a medical doctor, but maybe one who knows something about mushrooms. All right. So what are your thoughts on side effects from chemicals released and toxins building up in the liver from a mushroom experience or any other plant medicine? You know, are there any thoughts on that, as well as bipolar disorders or other chemical imbalances and medication interactions with mushrooms? So I guess kind of the pharmacology of this.
Let's start small and work up. The liver detoxifies mushroom, you know, it chelates it and gets it out, and pegs it and methylates it and does all this stuff, which is a natural detoxification process. When you do an excess dose repeatedly over time, you're going to have impact on the liver. Now, the liver is a very resilient organ. It can take a beating and keep on ticking, let me tell you. I would be very careful using any type of medications, psychiatric medications, in conjunction with any psychedelic, because the mushrooms tend to upgrade and downgrade certain enzymes in the liver. So it might cause 100 milligrams might act like 200 milligrams, or 100 milligrams might act like 300. It's just that you need to be very careful with combining. As a matter of fact, I don't recommend it at all. The psychedelics and the psychotropic medication. That's just common sense.
Yeah. All right. Good. Good advice also. Okay. Got another question. Let's see if I can make this make sense to me so that I can ask it properly. So we've got somebody who has dealt with hypothalamic hamartoma, a brain tumor. This resulted in epilepsy, and it hyperstimulates her brain. She's ended up with a very high IQ, but daily seizures. And she's always wondered if growing up with this condition, so I guess it possibly could be generalized into any condition. If you're growing up with a condition that makes life very difficult physically, is that trauma, if there's trauma related to that somebody brings into later in life? It could, growing up with a physical condition, create trauma that would need to be worked on and healed. Yeah, we don't know. Okay, maybe too specific on that one. All right. All right. I think Kate, were you trying to talk? Are you trying to talk, Kate? You're on mute. I just unmuted you.
Yeah. I don't think there's anything that I would say, no, you can't do anything with trauma work. You can always try effective trauma work. Sometimes it's miraculous. Sometimes it's just part of the whole picture. But it's, it seems like we're just starting to understand how much trauma, in the sense of all those complete experiences, is at the root of part of the picture of some of the other health issues.
All right, excellent. Excellent. Okay, well that's the end of the questions. So I guess before we drop off here, a couple more things, so stick with me. Panelists, first of all, Belinda, Kate, Dave, thank you guys so much for doing this. I know we had some technical issues, and I'm really grateful for you guys putting up with that, but truly grateful for your time. The Decriminalized Nature Arizona group, we are grateful for your time. Do any of you have one last short thing that you want to put out there before we start signing off here?
I do. I have one point that I wanted to make, especially to decriminalize those individuals working in the decriminalized nature, working on any type of legislation in the Tucson or Phoenix or Flagstaff area. One of the things that's really important, and one of the, and I think many of you have been in conferences that I have spoken to related to this point. And one of the things I want to challenge you with is that to be an organization as you're creating these policies, to become a model where you have inclusion of people of color to be able to sit at your table and to have dialogue with. To date, I haven't seen anything, and even the more recent legislation that's been rolling out in Minnesota and in Washington, D.C., that continues to be a conversation. And so you're in an ideal location where you have a great population of Native Americans. And so I wanted to, challenge you with all coming up with a model that works for everybody and that is inclusive of the voices that need to be at the table. So thank you.
Yes. Yes. Thank you for that. Okay, Dave, you have any last words? All right. Okay. So
just real quick.
Yeah.
The whole world of psychedelics and psychedelic research and administration and pharmacology and all of this is just moving. It's just like a snowball. It's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I remember when it was all decriminalized and got shut down hard, but now it's like it's moving faster and faster, and the research is deeper and better and multi-centered and international, and the trials going on are good science, and it's stuff that I think our ancestors knew already, but we're rediscovering it. So let's keep the ball rolling, folks. Thank you.
Yeah, keep the ball rolling. Outstanding. Okay. So everybody, please find us on Facebook, Decriminalized Nature Arizona. Like the page, follow us. I just posted a link to our next event, which is going to feature Dr. Joe Tafur and Dr. Amalia Baca, who are going to talk to us about the intersection of psychedelic medicine and healthcare. So what we ask of you guys who attended here today is please go home and talk to your friends, talk to your family, talk to the people you work with, and just talk. Bring this up and talk about it so we can break any stigmas that are out there, so we can get the whole community talking about the benefits of these medicines and have people no longer look at this as something that should be criminalized, but something that has the benefits that these three amazing experts share with us today. So thank you guys all for coming. Very grateful. And we will see you next month, and we'll see you on Facebook. Thanks, everyone.